We will record this session, so we are able to send this session to you after the webinar ends. I will start off by thanking you and welcoming you to all of our attendees to the webinar, Managing a National Track and Field Meet Under Current Health and Safety Guidelines. This webinar is hosted by Mondo and Coach O. My name is Latasha Pittman, and I am the Director of Marketing for Mondo. I have been with Mondo for over 18 years, and I've worked closely with the track and field community throughout the United States. Today, I will serve as the moderator of today's webinar. Prior to introducing our panelists, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping rules. All of the attendees that have joined us today, you are on mute, so any questions that you have, you can submit those questions in the Q&A section, and we will discuss those at the end of the webinar. If you have any comments, you can also submit your comments in the chat session. We'll do our best to answer your questions at the end of the panel discussion, but we may not get to all, but we'll do our best. With the recent developments in sports and track and field, our goal is today to show you that there is resiliency within track and field. In today's webinar, we will discuss how we can collectively operate in the current environment to safely host a track and field event with the new hurdles that we literally have to overcome. Today we have assembled a diverse panel to discuss the webinar topic of hosting a national track and field meet under the current health and safety guidelines. I will start by introducing our first panelist. It is Coach O, or Charles Oliver. Coach O is the owner of Coach O Enterprises, the one-stop shop for all of your track and field needs, which just celebrated 31 years in business. Services of Coach O include online registration, event management and marketing, staff recruitment, event entertainment, track equipment, and more. Charles Oliver is a former student athlete of Troy University and former assistant coach for the University of Tennessee. He is an active member and advocate for the nation's track and field community and has served in leadership positions with several organizations, major athletic events, and a member of numerous boards, including the Knoxville Track Club, AAU Executive Committee Board, AAU Junior Olympic Games, USATF Meet Directors Association, as well as NCAA and SEC positions. He now serves as the National Chair for the AAU Track and Field. Our second panelist is Rusty Buchanan. Rusty Buchanan serves as the first Vice President of AAU, where he has played an instrumental role in the successful execution of countless track and field events for the last 4 decades. The most recent event was the 2020 AAU Junior Olympic Games held in Satellite Beach, Florida. In addition to his work with AAU, Buchanan formed and manages the Buchanan Company, Inc. and Space Coast Sports Promotions. Together, these two organizations have a successful track record in attracting sport activities to the Brevard County area. Buchanan is known as one of the most prolific producers of youth sport tournaments, camps, clinics, and festivals in America. Buchanan has hosted events on Space Coast throughout his entire 36-year career and was inducted into the Space Coast Sports Hall of Fame in 2014. Our third panelist is Marshawn Atkins. Marshawn Atkins is a track and field event management and timing veteran. He currently serves on the AAU Track and Field Committee and is the CEO and founder of Atkins Track Timing Association, Inc., which provides event timing services for over 200 events annually. Other services include custom timing software and solutions, online registration, and scoreboard display services. His work has given him insight into event management with organizations such as AAU, USATF, NCAA, and sports commissions and convention and visitor bureaus around the country. Atkins is a fixture in the Illinois youth and track and field community, bringing dozens of track and field events to the Rockford area. His work has earned him the Community Service Award for the Illinois Park and Recreation Association. Lastly, I have a co-panelist and moderator, Tricia Myers. She will be providing technical support, managing time, and facilitating Q&A for today's discussion. She is the founder and president of On the Right Track LLC, OTRT Events, a full-time marketing and event management agency specializing in event planning, process improvement, marketing and brand strategy, and technical development for athletics competitions. Myers has a wealth of experience in track and field meet management and administration, working with organizations such as USATF, AAU, YMCA, and the NCAA. So Join me in thanking our panelists and welcoming them to today's webinar. We will go ahead and get started with our first question. And I will start our first question with Rusty Buchanan. Rusty, because you recently hosted the AAU Junior Olympic Games in Satellite Beach, Florida, what we'd like to ask you is, can you tell us what do you do from a planning perspective to the actual event and being able to host an event? Can you kind of walk us through that process?
Well, I'll give it my best shot. It's probably going to be a bit different in each community. But first of all, let me thank you for putting this together. And Coach O and Marshawn, it's certainly a privilege to be on the same panel with all you guys. And certainly there is a wealth of expertise among Marshawn and Coach O. And hopefully we can get a whole lot out of it. But I think it all boils back down initially to the attitude. You know, where do you start? And in this very, very difficult time, in this situation where literally health and well-being of our young athletes and their families are on the line, it really needs to begin with, what is your attitude? What do you think? And it's easy to, in this situation, say, no, we can't. The more difficult route is one to say, how do we? And so what happened in our specific incident was the AAU Junior Olympic Games were supposed to be in Hampton, Virginia, or Norfolk area. When the AAU decided, in conversation with the university, that the facility was not going to be available, we said, what other options do we have? I had been very fortunate to be working very, very closely with our governor's office to try to take the Sunshine State Games, which is our state game program, and pull it under one umbrella. How do we make it all look the same, all state games program? And the concept came out, instead of saying, well, we can't, we kind of said, let's try to figure out if we can and how we can. And that attitude came straight from our state, from our governor's office, from our Florida Sports Foundation, Sunshine State Games people. So we put our heads together collaboratively and said, well, where do we start? And the starting point was, what does the federal government, what does the state government, what does a local government say is safe? And then how can we build a program that complies with all those things and maybe even goes above and beyond? So we started out with, what are the CDC guidelines in safe sport? Well, our governor had opened the state to sport about 2 weeks prior to us trying to determine if we could do the Junior Olympic Games here or not. So we looked at that criteria first. The CDC says this, and that was our base point. That was our jumping off point. Can we comply with the CDC guidelines in all steps of planning and organizing? Can we comply with our state regulations? What does the state say that we have to do? And that's where it got a little tricky, because our state said groups of no more than 10, no more than 50 spectators. You must maintain social distancing. So how do we build a program that complies with all those state guidelines? On top of that, the next problem was, well, what do we look at in the county guidelines? Because Florida, the health departments, county by county, determined what phase of reopening we were in. The South Florida counties still to this day are lagging a little bit behind because how COVID has affected them. So the ability to do some things in our county was a bit different than it was in some of those others. So the next step was to work with our local authorities. And the final piece was, well, what do the facilities say? If we're using a school facility, what are their requirements? So we gathered all those requirements, put our heads together, and then literally got on the phone every single day with Coach O and said, how can we take all these guidelines, and if the state's open to sport, how can we create a safe environment for these kids to participate? It meant eliminating some sports. It meant limiting the numbers. And I'll let Coach O get into more of that because that was really what he had to do. But it started with an attitude, and that attitude was not just let's not do it, but how can we figure out how to? And then the real hard part is what are the guidelines and how do we ensure that we're not only complying with those, but taking every possible step to keep our people safe. And that's where it started with us. And I'd be happy to go into some specifics a little later on. But I think it all boils back down to saying, well, we can't do it, but how can we do it? And I think that's where we had to start.
And Coach O, do you want to add your perspective on this?
Yeah, and you know, going along with what Rusty said, that's exactly what, you know, we have been trying to tell people. You know, everybody was looking and listening to the media and everything and trying to, everybody was talking about, we can't do this, we can't do that. But if we are going to be in this sport and try to move forward, try to recover, somebody needed to take the lead and try to gather all of the information and put together a plan as to how do we move forward, bring the sport back, and bring our sport of track and field back. Because as you are listening to all of the news media, it's a blanket coverage in terms of what's going on. But we wanted to be very specific about track and field and how we could bring it back and do it safely. And so I was very excited to be involved with the group, with the AAU and all these individuals to bring, you know, the sport back and setting all of the parameters and stuff.
But basically where we started was what is an overarching safety protocol for everybody, coaches, athletes, parents, kids, anybody that's going to be involved in this event. What are our overarching safety protocols? And we developed those, and they were relatively simple, but we reached out to the head of our health department, said, hey, here's what we think is safe. What do you think? You tell us what you think. And they gave us feedback on that umbrella, on that overall COVID plan. And it was limiting your audience, limiting the parents, keeping the social distance, ensuring mask wearing, ensuring hand sanitizing. And we created that umbrella, if you will. Then after we had an umbrella that everybody had to follow, we began to develop sport-specific protocols specific to the sport that we're talking about. And then in this instance, it was track and field. So we started looking at the track and field and said, how can we comply with the CDC guidelines? How can we get our health department to endorse this program and work with us in developing it so that we know that it's safe? We give up a little liability in that we've got them involved with us in not only the planning, but the implementation of this. And it meant in Coach O's had to make some tough decisions. We eliminated some sports, and O can talk about why we did that. But those are some of the decisions.
We will ask some questions about the protocols.
Sure.
In moving through, actually hosting the event, I'll kind of move over to Marshawn. What did you do for the seating of the races and the field events?
So like with the seating, we have to consider how many people were allowed to be either in a stadium or a competition venue at a time. So I think initially you have to limit the number of participants to comply with those regulations or mandates. And there were also other things, whereas like in sprint events, and especially considering the 100 meter dash where everybody lines up on the same line and they're all shoulder to shoulder, where in those events you're able to also have empty lanes, and run either in the odd number lanes or the even number lanes. And then also you have to look at whereas our regulations allow, they may permit for 12 to 18 athletes in a heat of a given race. You may want to limit that to a number that the track can accommodate and still comply with the social distancing. And the same thing with field events, you know, you're able to flight them, and then having smaller flight sizes would tackle that congestion as well. And then actually spacing or buffering time between the successive flights. So those are the things that were considered with respect to seating and organizing the events.
And I'll jump in there, with Marshawn, because one of the things, that I had to deal with as we was working with AAU Junior Olympic Games. We typically last year in Greensboro, North Carolina, we had a field of 13,601, youth, there with us, which is basically the largest youth track meet in the world. And as we were looking at the parameters set by state, federal, and local, we realized that, you're talking about field sizes as you're dealing with those governmental agencies of 10, 50, 250 people. So we literally had to come back, downsize our entire model to the point we decided we're going to do 48 kids, in a race. So instead of having 100 and something kids in a race, then we had to limit it to 48. That allows us, to also be able to adequately schedule the amount of time that we would need, for all of the kids to come through the entire system, and to keep them, the social distancing as we're moving through. So that's one of the things I would say, to the panel, if you can, to the coaches that are listening, if you can look at your field sizes and be able to ascertain exactly, those specific numbers that are going to be coming through and be able to time it. One of the things that we have done over the course of the last 10 or 12 years is actually time our kids in terms of when they're in the process. We know that once they come in the clerk's tent, from the time they come in the clerk's tent to the time they exit the track, we know exactly how long they have stayed at each station. So we kind of set the parameters that we were going to finish up every day. Being in South Florida, it was going to rain, pretty much every afternoon. So we looked in terms of planning, what events can we do, what events we cannot do. It is going to rain every day between 2 and 4 o'clock. Can we put together a schedule using the number of kids that we decided on, which was 48? Can we put together a schedule to be able to move the people through our system, efficiently and on out, while maintaining the social distancing also?
And that brings up another question. What changes in the meet operations or the administration of the meet that you have to do and plan for and adjust for, like packet pickup, registration, any of those kind of?
Well, yeah, and it's basically started, with packet pickup, because that's the first thing that everybody did when they got on site. And we were realizing that, one, we could not have the volume of people that we normally have, coming through the building. So we initially, set it at about 2 to 3 people that would actually be in the room. And when we got there, a little larger room, we were able to keep the social distancing from everybody, keep everybody, with the social distancing. And then also as we basically treated all of the pre-treated. We bought a chemical that is supposed to keep the virus, away from you for 90 days. Kill the virus on any of the surfaces that is on for 90 days. So we pre-treated everything, kept the social distancing, there. And anytime anybody, came up, we made sure that we had enough staff that we could move people through, really quickly, so they didn't end up feeling like, well, okay, they only let 2 or 3 people in the room, then, there's a long line, out the door. So we were able, to do that. We also, I'm sorry, go ahead.
We had a question that came up in the panel, like how did you handle like implements and their inspection and sanitation, those things?
Well, I would say with that, as I said, first of all, we pre-treated everything that was, when I say common implements, we pre-treated any areas that we knew that multiple people would have to handle. And so, starting blocks, hurdles, batons, any of that. But we also made sure that all of our officials, starting out with the officials, that we had masks, gloves, and hand sanitizers for all the officials. We asked that all of the, we made it mandatory that all of the attendees, parents, coaches, and everybody also, had their mask on, at the same time. And that's just basically to keep, people, safe as we're moving. And we also kept announcing I was really proud of a lot of my officials, because the officials, in their area kept reminding everybody, to keep your mask on, keep your social distancing. And we did that over the PA system, the police officers and all of that, to make sure that we kept everybody aware.
Well, that brings me to the next question. And I think this is an important one. How do you address the staging guidelines for the athletes to keep them safe for pre-race, race, including warm-up areas? I'll let whoever wants to start off on that, because it's probably you, Coach O, but if you want to let someone.
I'll start off and definitely ask the rest of the panelists to jump in. Okay. But when we realized, like I said, we cut our field size down to 48 so that we would know exactly what was going to be coming through. But you take, for example, that in given age group at AAU Junior Olympic Games, we would basically call, let's say in the clerk, we would call in 9-year-olds in 100 meters. So literally I would have 110 per agenda. So we'll have 200 kids coming in that tent at the exact same time. And with the system and structure that we have in place, we've given everybody pre-instructions. They know where they're going, in the tent. But obviously we could not have 200 kids coming through that tent at the same time. So we split the agendas, and we would only bring in one heat at a time. So when we brought in one heat, those 8 kids would literally go, to a table. We had enough room that they maintained their social distancing when they went, to the table to pick up their information. And then while they was at the table, picking up their information, our officials had masks and gloves and had the hand sanitizer, so they really could have everything laid out on the table so that the kids could just come pick it up and not have to, touch anybody. We would bring them out on the track. At all times, we attempted to keep them social distancing as we moved them from station to station. And also as we, ran the race, during the course of the day and between races, we literally, I'll say, sanitize the track or wash down the track, because everybody puts their hand on those same starting lines for the sprint races. So we would sanitize the track. We would wash the track, and a lot of people have seen in the past that if a kid gets sick, and happen to throw up or something like that, we have a crew right there to clean it all up. So they were kind of used to seeing that. But I'm not sure if they realized that this year we did it even more so, just to make sure that the area that a lot of people were touching was actually being sanitized, And then after the race, was over, we escorted the kids, out of the gate, pretty much kept them separate as we were, trying to bring them off the track, and then sent them back to mom, dad, and coach.
Yeah, and I'll add to that one other thing that we try to do with events is to have a distinct area to enter and another area to exit, where that the participants that are entering do not encounter the ones that are exiting, and so you actually have a really solid flow, and you minimize congestion wherever possible.
Coach O mentioned that the starting line in any common surfaces, the blocks, etc. With the older kids, there was hand sanitizer, and they were instructed to actually sanitize their hands, the final staging area before they went on the track. And with the younger kids, Coach O actually had one of our event staff walking around with a bottle of hand sanitizer, squirting it into the kids' hands as they were in the tent, literally steps away from going on to the starting line. Maybe not, certainly not required or mandated, but just an extra step that we had said, let's do everything we possibly can to keep this safe. So hand sanitizer and sanitizing the surfaces like Marshawn was talking about, certainly, certainly a big priority.
And I also want to mention, what we did for field events, also before we moved on, because there again, we limited the field sizes. There were a couple of events we did not do pole vault and high jump because as we were going through our planning, process, and the one thing I said, I got a lot of questions going into the meet, and one of the questions was, what are you going to do to keep my child, safe? And so that was an issue that we always, had to address. And as it pertained, to the field events, we normally would have bleachers there for the parents to set on. We didn't have bleachers. They could bring their lawn chairs or their chairs, obviously doing the 6 feet, social distancing, from there. We issued, in addition to a mask, we issued gloves, to all of our staff, and they wore the gloves as much as possible, trying to pick up a shot and a discus on a regular basis. But we also, we pre-treated all of the implements and stuff before we took them out. And then our staff would pick them up, and we had the little tubes where we rolled it back and everybody got, their own implement. Even when we staged them up under the tent, our attempt was to keep them as separate as we, possibly could while they was waiting, their turn. So these are just some of the things that we did, in the field events to try to make sure everybody stayed safe and healthy.
Thanks, Coach O. I wanted to just circle back on the requirements that Rusty mentioned, and we had a question regarding questionnaires. Was there a requirement to complete questionnaires, COVID questionnaires, and were there temperature checks at any point?
Rusty, you want to jump in there?
I'll do that. Yes, absolutely. One of the first things we did in making sure that our staff was safe is that Coach O reached out to all the officials, and of a pool of about 150, we found about 50 that were willing to come in and participate. Basically, what we said we want to try to do is we want to keep those folks isolated as best as possible. So all of our officials came in, and every official that came in stayed in one hotel property. They were given N95 masks. They were given gloves. They were given hand sanitizer. They were even given face shields. And each morning, prior to coming to the track, their temperature would be checked, and they would be given a wristband for that day, indicating that they had passed a temperature check. The athletes were all the same. If an athlete came in, the first thing that we would do with that athlete, and I'll get into the parents and spectators a little later because we handle that a bit differently, but the athletes were handled the same way. They would come in, they would get a temperature check. If their temperature was less than 100.4, then they were given the wristband for that day, indicating that they had their temperature checked and it was not above the CDC guidelines of allowable temperature. And that wristband was good for them to be in the facility for that day. Coming back the next day, they'd have to go through the same process again. There was a combination, if you will, waiver, questionnaire, liability, and I can get into that a little more when we talk about the parents, but everybody signed that, and it said, I will comply with all the guidelines. I understand the risks. I take this responsibility on, and I am here of my own free will, and I'll do everything that you ask of me to keep the others around me safe. So yes, there was a pretty extensive requirement that we had for everybody to sign.
Since you mentioned officials, do you want to talk about the protocol that you all used for the officials? Because there's a few more things you talked about as far as what they had, but how you weeded through the total number of officials to get to the 50 or so that you had for this event.
Yeah, that was interesting. I'll say that was a desired number of officials that I like to have, for the meet. One of the things that we recruited our officials and stuff, and everybody realizes that I say 90% of your officials are within, I guess, the target age range that's acceptable, to the virus and stuff. And so, any of our officials that committed and for whatever reason, whatever reason they changed their mind and was unavailable, to come, it basically said, I love you. Let's get ready, for Houston, for the next year. But, when the ones that we had came in, and like I said, I think the numbers been mentioned, we literally went through 150 people that I use a athletic football and basketball nomenclature that committed and decommitted. So we ended up with 50, which was more than fine with what we needed. But you normally put officials in a double room because of COVID-19. All the officials had the option to have a single room if they felt comfortable and wanted to be a roommate or to room with somebody. Then that was their option, and they were allowed to do that. But all the officials were offered the option to have a single room. And as we said, we did temperature checks every day before we even left, the hotel. Everybody signed a waiver saying that they was healthy and understood, what was going on. We got there to the track. All of the people were, made sure that their area maintained social distancing and all of the, items that we needed to make sure to keep everybody safe and healthy. So basically what we tried to do was put our officials in a bubble to make sure that we kept them safe and healthy, and that also everybody that they was involved, in contacting and being around, that they could pass on, the healthy vibes and what we were doing to make sure that this was a positive, healthy, event.
Okay, great. Let's go ahead and move on to the next question. How do you conduct the events? What modifications were made to accommodate each event? So this would, did it affect anything in terms of rules, anything of that nature?
Okay. One of the things that, I guess what we try to do is to keep the event, the sport of track and field, it's close to what we know the sport, being. We were pretty adamant about not destroying the integrity of the sport, and that's why some of the events that we felt like we did not know what the parameters were for pole vault and high jump, at that time. So those kept changing so much that we couldn't get a grasp on what we could do to actually make sure at that time that everything was safe. So we did not do that. But as I had said before, the other areas, we pre-treated everything and tried to make sure that we just kept sports the events within the guidelines of the sport, if that's making any sense.
We did make some decisions, and it boiled down to our standpoint. How do we give the most kids the most opportunity to participate? And you remember Marshawn was talking about limiting the fields and spreading this stuff out. So kind of building off what Marshawn was saying, we looked at and said, well, if we've got this much time that we can put kids on the track, and if we run 6 heats of the 4x8, well, this many kids can get on that surface in this time. But if we create this whole meet in a flow with the concept of getting kids into the track, off the track, getting parents into the stands, out of the stands, we comply with the CDC guidelines, we comply with our local guidelines, we comply with our school board guidelines, but we can probably get more kids on the track by running a few more heats, like Marshawn was saying, in the 100 to 200, even if you've got to distance them a little bit, then we could running a few more heats of the 4x8. So Coach O and his committee had to make some decisions on how do we best use the time and the space to create this flow of athletes and flow of parents so that we never have more than 250 people in the stands, no more than 50 athletes on the track at any one time, and what format and structure do you put in place to give the most kids the opportunity to participate. So I think O added a few more heats of the 1 and the 2 and cut down on the 4x8 or 4 by something. I forgot exactly what it was. It may have been 15s, but those were decisions we had to make here again based on the health parameters that we were trying to work within.
Well, and to continue along the same lines, as we looked at the number of athletes that we thought that we could handle, keeping in mind the guidelines of state and local guidelines. And I'm going to say to the attendees that it's time consuming to look at all of this, but if you're going to do it and try to do it right, you have to spend the time. Well, about we had a daily phone call that lasted an hour to 2 hours, 5 or 6 o'clock almost every day, 5 days a week for several weeks to go over and over and over, all of this to the standpoint of if they were only allowing 250, people to basically be inside the facility or in a location at any given time, we looked at how many was in an event, how many mom and dad and coaches was possibly in the stands, how many people would be in the stands, on the track, or on the tents. And we were able to keep those numbers, we felt like within the guidelines of about 50 people in any given area. But, obviously knowing that people are going to be moving and changing. So that's the flow that we're talking about. So as somebody is moving, that changes, those numbers. So we spent a lot of time, looking at all of that and coming up, with those numbers. But the one thing that we did want to do, we went by the state, federal, and local, guidelines and constantly ran our plan by them to make sure that we was following their protocol. But the most important thing to me was to make sure that we kept the integrity of each event, intact, and was not trying to do something that went against the sport of track and field.
Marshawn, did you want to add anything to Rusty and Coach O about the events?
I think they covered it all.
Okay, then we'll move on. We talked briefly about this, but in the current situation, how do you handle parents and spectators attending the events? What is your communication plan? How do you handle limiting the number of parents and spectators?
Rusty, you're on mute.
There, sorry about that. The athletes wanted to compete, and they were hungry, and I think the parents wanted them to be there. But the most important thing that we faced was how do we not only comply with all these guidelines, but keep with the whole concept of why there are guidelines, and that's to keep everybody safe. And we may have done a bit of overkill, but we did. We started with signage, and signage was everywhere before you even got close to the track and field venue. That there will be temperature checks, there will be some mandatory signings of waivers, and everybody knew coming in that had they had any symptoms or been in contact with anyone that had any symptoms, we did not want them, for the safety of everybody, to come through our gate. So as they approached the gate, there was signage, and not only was there signage, we had markers and signs every 6 feet so that the groups, actually they're closer to 10 feet, so that the groups as they came in were waiting on these marks to come through our screening table and our screening tents. So the first thing that they would do before they even got into the facility is they would sign a waiver. And this waiver said, I have not been in contact. I understand your rules, and I will comply with all these regulations that you've got in place. I'm not going to sue anybody, and I take responsibility for my actions, and I'll make sure I do my part to stay safe. From that point, they would step to a temperature staging area. At the temperature staging area, if their temperature was over 100, they would be denied entry and would go to a secondary screening area. In that secondary screening area, they would fill out another questionnaire that says, have you come in contact with anybody? Have you had these symptoms? Have you done this? And they would be allowed a cooling off period. If after that cooling off period, their temperature was again above 100, and this time the cutoff was 100.4, which is the CDC guidelines, not only were they not admitted, but anyone in their group that came in that little cluster was also not admitted because of a fear that they had been exposed. We had made arrangements with two medical entities here, Health First and MedFast, both of which were in reasonable proximity to the track, to take and test these folks for free. So we would refer them, anyone that came in, we would refer them to be tested, and they would not be back allowed in until they had a negative testing report that they could present to somebody saying they had not been exposed to it, or they were not actively shedding the COVID virus. At that point, if they passed those two stations, the next one was a mask station, and they had a sign before saying that they would wear a mask. The city actually put in a city ordinance in effect the week before that masks were mandatory any place in the city, which included the track. So we required them to wear, parents and spectators to wear them at all times. So we actually went out and purchased over 4,000 masks, and we gave them away to everybody that came in, got a mask, so that there was no excuse that they couldn't wear a mask. There was also then the final step before entering was a hand sanitizing station. They'd have their hands sanitized. And then the last step in dealing with the parents is before they came actually into the gate of the track, we had a counter there keeping track of how many people came inside on each side of the stands. We had our stands divided into sections. We had roped off sections that we were not allowing seating in, and I think the number was 50. Oh, help me if I'm wrong here, 50 per section. And then at the conclusion of that race, they were encouraged to exit. And then, as Coach O said, any high-touch areas or any surfaces, we sanitized with a sanitizing solution. We had a cleaning crew there. And then at the end of the day, we actually brought in this thing called a sterilizer that we used on some of the surfaces to sterilize, just to make sure that we were complying with all of those guidelines. So the parents were probably the most difficult folks to deal with, but it worked out with the exception of one day when we got rain and we had one group fall on top of the other group and we exceeded our limitation guidelines. We also had on-site police officers as well as EMTs, just to ensure that everybody knew that we were taking this very serious. And I think that all worked in our favor. But that was the protocols, and it seemed to work.
Okay, I have a question about that. You know, with all the guidelines that you have to follow, is there an additional cost associated with hosting a meet in this current situation? Because I think that's a big question probably out there. You know, now to host a meet and follow all the guidelines, is there an additional cost? And second part of that question would be, do you have corporate sponsors? Because you mentioned the health organization helping with the testing to be able to offset some of those costs.
The simple answer is yes and yes. Okay. We did have corporate partners, some very good, very positive corporate partners that realized it wasn't us that opened the state to sport. It was the governor. We were the ones that were trying to do it safely. And so we had folks wanting to align with us because they saw an opportunity to get in a safe return to sport. So we did have some good corporate partners. Probably our biggest expense was in housing and keeping our officials separate. Coach O and Paul and everyone made the decision that instead of depending on local officials, we would bring in officials there. We could keep them in a bubble, kind of keep them safe, keep them isolated. You could do that locally. We could just, do all your local officials, just get in with them beforehand, make sure that they have not had any symptoms within the 14-day period, make them sign the waivers, or heck, now with these rapid tests that are all free, that wouldn't be a big issue, and that wouldn't be a huge cost. The masks were not terribly expensive, but in this day and age, we all pretty much going to have to get used to that for a little while anyway. And the sanitizing equipment or the sanitizing solutions were not too expensive. And we did have a lot of signs that we bought, but here again, we looked at that as an investment. So a little bit more money. It was probably offset by our partners. And in some instances, there were ways around it. We just had a very short window and we went ahead and paid for stuff. So.
And is it a recommended sanitizing brand or company that you use? Because I know that will be a huge question for everyone on this call. What do you use and what kind of product? Is it costly? Is it a spray system or what do you do?
Well, if you've got a Mondo track, I don't think virus lives on Mondo tracks. That's a question for probably O and Marshawn more than me on what all they use for all those things. We did use a product called BioProtect in our other sports, and that solution is sprayed on the balls. And we also had a chemical fogger that we just went and bought a Ryobi from Home Depot. And you put the solution in that, and you can walk through the restrooms and walk through the stands and the seats. And it's simple and easy to use, and it was not very expensive. I don't know the brands that O and Marshawn use, but
that's what we use.
Or BioProtect?
Yeah, we use BioProtect, Rusty, and also to take that a little bit deeper, I want to go back, to not only did we buy that and treat all of the surfaces that we knew a lot of people, would be touching, but there was as Rusty alluded to, there was hand sanitizing stations throughout the entire, complex. And we gave everybody, all the athletes got a mask, and we had masks available, for parents and stuff. And all of the officials probably had like 8 to 10 different versions of masks, from the N95 to the generic blue ones to logoed.
To the Coach O track ones.
Hey, you got to do what you got to do. So
and Marshawn, you got yours on? Get a plug in, Marshawn.
So
branded masks are good.
we did all of that and make sure all of the parents, coaches, and athletes had all of that information. But one of all of those items, another thing that I thought was crucial was just the communication as we've got down here. We drove all of our registrants to the same entry, portal with need information and stuff. We had a FAQ, frequently asked questions page up there. And as questions came to us, we updated that FAQ to make sure that we had the most relevant information there that people was asking us. And then when you got to the meet, we kept, we would refresh the web page, that we had. We had everybody email addresses. So like, for example, if something happened, we knew that we could get in touch with everybody, immediately. First day we had the rainstorm came through, so we were able to email everybody to let them know, what was going on. But also in terms of heat sheets and results and all of that, instead of having a location that we normally have at the track, and as I referred to earlier, we would have 100 kids looking at the heat sheet, board for the 9-year-old boys, So instead of doing that, we made sure that we didn't do that board, which forced everybody to go to online to look at it, which we always have it anyway. But that sent everybody to to the clouds to see heat sheets and results, and we kept updating everything, fairly quickly. So we did everything that we could to keep everybody informed and answering the most relevant and pertinent questions in a timely manner as we possibly could.
Yeah, and I think also the use of technology has been kind of prevalent the past several years, and our athletes and parents and coaches are getting accustomed to going online and looking at stats, results, as well as heat sheets and stuff like that. And I think this pandemic just caused us to kind of like drum it up a little bit more and force folks to use that rather than to looking at printed matter. And the one main thing you want to do is to incorporate an element of self-service where, folks, if you got one-stop shopping on a website that you can get all your communications, all your results and everything, then we don't have to have folks handling printed matter, and it also, I think, allows us to be a little bit more lean on workers or officials that we would have to service the events. So then when we look at keeping our numbers down low, every official you have is one less spectator you can have in the venue. So I think that's important to note.
One other thing before we moved on, I wanted to talk about awards just one moment, because that's a area where everybody want to get their awards and take pictures and stuff. And we basically, instead of handing out the awards, all of the people in awards had face shields, masks, and gloves and hand sanitizers, and we pre-treated all of the awards and everything. But we literally would have the awards on the table, pre-treated, and athletes would walk up, kind of get their awards, or we created a little tree stand. So we had everybody standing behind their little stand, about social distancing 6 to 8 feet apart. So they actually had an award that had been treated. They was behind their number, and so mom and dad still got a chance to take the pictures, on the award stand. And so, as I said, many times what we tried to do is keep the integrity of our sport intact as much as we possibly could, and at the same time keeping everybody safe and healthy.
I think we've answered all of our questions that we had, and we have quite a few questions from our attendees. And one of the questions that just came through is, we've talked about hosting an outdoor event. Is this, I guess, protocol that you follow possible for hosting an indoor meet?
I think this protocol is possible, and for me and what I do up under Coach O Event Management, we're actually just put in about a dozen events throughout the country and developing written protocols, for that now. And really, all of this starts with, state, local, and federal, guidelines. What are the mandates there? Because I have seen places where they won't let you do anything. In some places, there you don't have 10 people, 50 people, 250 people. So you have to adjust according to that. But the one thing I want to say with what we are talking about here, one of the things that we are used to doing is scheduling or planning an event of 13,000 athletes, and we had to bring it down to a little over 2,000 athletes. And that's what I want the coaches and the members that are logged in here to realize, that these numbers may sound, way above what you're doing. But a lot of times, like for me, for example, I'll go in Macy's in the store and see what they got in Macy's. And then I go to Walmart and find the same doggone item, for a whole lot cheaper. So you take the basic concept of this and downsize it to an event, to a meet that fits your event. But to getting back to the indoor, one thing that I say again is, find the local guidelines of what they do, and then my company basically is going to take these same concepts and take them indoors, and it may be a lot easier, maybe, to keep everybody, to get all the hand sanitizer, and stuff to everybody, but we got to look at the flow. within the building, how many athletes, in, how many mom and dad in, and that same type thing. So yes, I think you can take this overall concept.
I would tend to agree with you. That the starting point is, what is your local guideline?
Yes.
What do you in your county, what does your health department allow? So first call I would make if I was running a meet would be to my local health department and find out who there will work with me. And we went straight to the top. The head of our health department said, we'll help you. We want to see this. It's good for the kids. There was not only was there no pushback, they would review stuff and amend it and get it back to me on the weekends. So you're going to find a good ally within your health department. It's their job to keep this this county safe, and it would be their job to keep your county. So start with them. The rules will be different, obviously, indoor than they are outdoor. I think in Brevard County right now, the rule was 50 for an indoor. So then you go back to Coach O's plan. Well, how do we do with 50? Well, you can't just hold a meet with 50 pits, but you can do a meet with 50 at a time in a flow. So the flow became the critical component. How do we figure out that? Get them on the track, get them run, get them off the track, get their parents in, let them watch them and get them out, do any sanitizing we need to do, and bring the next group in. So the flow became an important concept in terms of complying with what those guidelines are. But my first call would be the health department and say, hey, can we do this indoors and will you help me?
Yeah, and one of the things I want to chat with a bit is that, that we didn't offer the pole vault at the Junior Olympics. That was one of the events that weren't. We got a lot of pushback from a lot of pole vault coaches and clubs around the country. And so what I did here locally in Illinois was to host a national pole vault invitational. And we did it in under a couple weeks. We got 51 athletes registered from all over. I think we had 9 states represented, and it was some of the top vaulters in the country. And as such, we had like four attempts at national record heights, and with one national record being broken. Well, Illinois is one of the states that have very stringent standards. The Illinois Department of Public Health, laid down some guidelines and things of that nature. So what we first did was look at how many athletes we had coming in, and then so we structured the sessions. So we knew that we'd had morning and afternoon sessions, and we had to keep everything in the building under 50. So it's not just having 50 athletes, but you also have to consider spectators and officials and things of that nature. So what we did, we had I scheduled morning and afternoon sessions, and we made sure we kept everything down to where we wouldn't overload or break the number of 50 in terms of having those number of people in the building. And it turned out really nice, but as Coach O and Rusty were talking about, I mean, it's a different, it's different than hosting any other time, because you have to have, account for, hand sanitizer and these other things that you never really had to consider in hosting a meet before. So, I think, when you, venture out to host an event, just consider all the other precautions that you're going to have to take into consideration, when hosting.
And then I'd like to jump in and expand on that just a little bit more, because as we said many times, on this call today, the idea was how to do something. Everybody's sitting back saying, basically, you're getting all the information on what you could not do. So what we wanted to do, be proactive and see what we, how we could do, stuff. And in addition to AAU Junior Olympic Games, Marshawn had a pole vault invitational, there. I know there was a meet down in Atlanta between the two meets and specifically high jump pole vault type things. The kids either brought their own tarp. So because one of the reasons we did not do it at AAU Junior Olympic Games was at that time kids would land on that porous mat. And, you know, we weren't sure, you know, the virus and that mat and how long it'd stay on there. So a couple of other events, you know, you had the tarps, and we changed the tarps out between, you know, each event. The kids could either bring their own tarp or there were some tarps there. Tarps, I know that if they didn't have their athletes didn't have their own tarp, then the meet maybe provided the tarp, and then the tarps were sanitized, you know, each night and stuff like that. So the idea is just to be able to put on, you know, event. And I think I'm fortunate in that I've been involved with events this year, just with what we've done with AAU. I would say we've done the two largest youth meets in the country, you know, this year. We had the one there in Satellite Beach with a little over 2,100 athletes. We did one in Vegas with almost 1,000, you know, athletes. Then we did the specialty event that Marshawn had there with the pole vault. So we've done this in different number of athletes in different parts of the country. And in some of the difficulties that was encountered this year, I would say some of the most difficult things that we encountered wasn't even with COVID-19. It was so hot at one point just in Vegas that the timing computer didn't freeze. It overheated. So, you know, we literally, you know, had to deal, you know, with that. So, you know, we've been able to work on events in different parts of the country and kind of adjusting the parameters. But one thing that we did was talk to state, federal, and local, and talk to local people, grab what's going on in that area and try to put together a plan that worked, you know, for everybody. And so far it has worked, and we've been real fortunate for those of us that have been involved in all of those events. And I know Rusty and Marshawn, we've been fortunate enough to be involved in those.
Good, very good deal. I think we've passed about an hour or so. So in respect of everyone's time, we want to try to do the best we can to answer all of the submitted questions. So we're going to have a little bit of fun and do a lightning round here where I will present one of the questions that were posed, and whomever feels that they are most equipped to answer the question, go ahead and do so. But we'll ask that you try to summarize it as quickly as possible so we can try to attempt to address all the submissions here on the call. So the first is, how do you keep 4x4 runners or relay runners apart, 6 feet apart, when they are on the track awaiting a relay pass? So how might you guys have addressed that during the games?
Well, one of the things there, you know, I'll answer that, and it goes back to something I said many times, and some people may or may not agree, you know, with me, but it was vital to me to maintain the integrity of our sport while keeping people safe also. So basically, we kept them apart as long as we could until the actual competition. So in time for the actual competition, we lined them up like we always do. We shot the gun, we gave them the baton, and then we separated them again. There's no way you're going to make a tackle in football and stay 6 feet away from that guy. No way you're going to do that. So we tried to maintain the integrity of the sport as much as we possibly could. So we lined them up, kept them apart as long as we could, let them get the baton, and then we separated them after the race.
Great.
And I think, to add on real quick to that, our first concept was hopefully everyone that was in that track, we had some level of confidence that they were not actively shedding a virus because we'd done those precautions in advance. You know, they'd sanitized their hands, they'd had a mask on the entire time, and nobody had a temperature because everybody had to get that temperature check and get their wristband. So we tried to mitigate it as best we could, but to O's point, we did try to make it feel like a track meet.
So I guess it's just fair to say that there's going to be some assumption of risk in putting on an event, you know, so you can't eliminate or rule out all possible risks. You know, there has to be some, but you have to diminish that level of risk. And I think if you look at the aforementioned protocols that were taken, you could see that the risk was vastly diminished.
Great. There are a couple questions that have come through that are very specific to AAU. So I'll go ahead and pose them, and if it's best to direct folks to different parties to have them address that, then certainly let us know. But the first here, looking at 2021, do you think a national waiver form generated by AAU for district and national qualifiers will be needed?
Well, I'll start by that and say I don't see that happening on a national level, simply because the requirements and the rules are different state by state. Even in Florida, it's county by county. So what would be included in a national waiver may be a bit different than what would be, for example, we're looking at, if you heard my conversation earlier this afternoon or this morning with Coach O about the senior games, Broward County is still a hot spot, and it's still a place that folks are not real comfortable going. So what something would look like in Broward County is a whole lot different than it would look like here in Brevard, where our case counts are low, and we do not have as much restriction on activity. We're in a different phase of reopening. So I think those waivers are good. They protect you. They protect the athletes. They get parents and participants to comply, but they probably should be done on more of a local level. And I think that's probably where I see that best fitting. You guys can jump into Marshawn.
Yeah, also, I agree with that. And then also, too, you got to look at the legal language. And this is something that we deal with in like our contracts with certain schools, because we deal with schools all over in the Southeast, South, and here in Illinois and all throughout the country. You know, our contracts with them have to be worded a lot differently. So if you're going to have something that's going to be a document that'll be legally binding, you have to make sure it'll work in every state. And I'm not sure that you're going to have a document that would come from the national office that would be binding in every state. So that's why it's imperative that you go to the local level to get that. So I think when you look at something from on the national level, yeah, you can get that, because you would target it to, like, for instance, next year we're going to be in Houston. You would want to target it to meet Texas law. So that's the difference, I think.
And I would just say, you know, real quickly, we're fortunate that most of our meet directors are the same people. And what we will be doing is the same template we've shared here. Now we will be working more closely with our local meet directors to make sure, first of all, finding out what their local guidelines are, and then bringing a national, an AAU national perspective to it, in addition, along with what is the federal and national, U.S. national, guidelines, to ensure that they are doing what they need to do. Now, in terms of providing all of the necessary protection equipment and all of that, there again, we'll have those conversations with them to make sure that everybody stays, we provide a safe environment as possible.
Great. Next, given the latest data that COVID-19 is in fact a partial airborne virus and the new safe social distance is 30 feet, what changes, if any, can you implement to ensure complete safety?
I think it goes back to what we talked about before, that there's going to be if you're going to host an event, there's going to be some inherent risk associated with conducting the competition, but you want to, diminish the risk as much as possible. And I think with safety protocols, and even when you look at when it was initially put out that 6 feet was acceptable, you see that Rusty and crew went 8 to 10 feet, with these markers to where they were having people standing. And so, you can exceed the local standards, but I don't think with the 30 feet mandate, you would be able to have competitions if you tried to meet that measurement.
This question, I believe, was already answered, but what is the product used to disinfect? How available and how expensive is it? So I know we talked about BioProtect earlier. I guess how readily available is it and the expense?
Go ahead.
Back a month ago, it was difficult to get hand sanitizer. Today, not so much. We actually ordered it in bulk, and at one point, I think we had over 100 gallons of hand sanitizer. It was not an exorbitant expense. The mask prices, we got those out of the N95s are a little more difficult to find a few months ago than they are now. And the pricing has dropped because everybody began manufacturing them. But I will be real honest with you, the N95s, if you're not a healthcare professional, it's tough wearing those things all day long. And the theory behind the masks are, you don't wear a mask to protect you from getting it. You wear a mask to protect others from getting it from you, other than the N95s. So what we found is that most of the people that came into the stadium, they either had their own masks, or they had a Coach O mask, or they had an AAU mask, or they had a Marshawn mask. But the expense was not terrible, and the cost wasn't astronomical on any of it, really.
Great. Again, another specific AAU question here. What if facilities are not available for 2021 to host district and national qualifiers due to COVID-19?
Well, that would obviously, that'll be a decision that has to be made. We are 10 months away, something like that. And so follow the current guidelines is basically what we would do.
Yeah, and we'll put out information as we get closer to that. We have we as an executive committee, we meet regularly, and we decide what's best, and we'll always err on the side of the athletes that participate in our events.
And I'll say the one thing here. What I personally feel like our job is to provide positive competitive opportunities for kids, and that's always been a mantra of mine. And other than positive competitive, we need to say safe. Now, so those are the things that we will be looking to do up under the current guidelines when we get to that time.
Sports for all, forever.
Great. The next question here was briefly touched upon regarding the pole vault with both Coach O and Marshawn. But what was the issue that kept you from having the pole vault and the high jump? What makes it different? Would those events be added back at the next meet? So I know Marshawn addressed the national meet that was conducted later in the year in a separate opportunity. But just any additional information on the decision regarding the pole vault?
It's the landing surface. The landing surface is, if you look at it, has it's like a mesh, and then it has like a fabric in there, which is very porous, and as such, it's hard to clean. It would be hard to sanitize and guarantee that one would be safe, and especially early on when we didn't know what the virus looked like or how to mitigate it. It was hard to put that on, and then you look at it was just such a greater risk, and that's why when we actually came up with the concept of, hey, well, if we use tarps, then tarps are not porous. I mean, they can they're not only water resistant. If someone landed on those, you could actually you're not gonna have the sweat of the athlete or the air droplets, and you just take that tarp off the mat, and the mat never gets impacted, and then the next person comes up with their own mat or tarp or a sanitized tarp. So I think the mitigation of that just was there was just a lag in knowing how to mitigate the vault issues. And it's the same situation for high jump as well. So the tarps work.
And I'll just say quickly, when we made the decision, not to do a high jump and pole vault, we used current data available at that time. And then 3 months later, 2 to 3 months later, we had more information. And so then Marshawn did, the pole vault there. So we used the data that we had. But then again, I'll keep going back, to you have a couple of decisions. Don't do anything, or how can you do something? And we chose the route of how can we do something.
Great. And the final one that we have submitted here is, were there any known transmissions that were traced back to the meet?
None that I'm aware of. I spent as much time after the meet trolling social media, talking to people that was there at the end of the competition, and not one. As a matter of fact, somebody on social media actually posted that same question after the meet, and the answer went from no, nobody, got anything that I'm aware of, to, oh, awesome meet, great time, thank you for doing it. So to this date, not one single anything negative in terms of health or anything else. I think it went well.
That concludes all of our questions. And that we first would like to say thank you to all of our panelists. And we'd like to say to Tricia, thank you for keeping everybody on track. I think you guys did a wonderful job in answering everyone's questions. To the attendees, we thank you for being part of this webinar. We will have additional webinars to follow. And we would ask that at the end, when you do log off, there is a short survey that you complete the survey. But we thank you for attending today. And thank you to Coach O, Rusty, Marshawn, and Tricia for being our panelists today.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
There's one more question. Thank you all, from Jose Orlena.
Jose.
Thank you. And that concludes our webinar for today. Everyone have a wonderful day.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.